welcome back to this section, another tutorial. And in this part 2 of our previous tutorial, we are going to look at how to animate this game object with inputs. So we are going to look how to transition between one state to another. Even though we have made these two animations, the idle animation and the run animation, we aren't going to transition them directly like this, but we are going to do so in something we call a blend tree. So in your animator and in your character selected, you right click on a space on the animator, create state, and click from new blend tree. Now with this blend tree selected, we are going to change the name from blend tree to locomotion. You can name it anything actually you want, but I decided to name it locomotion because it's going to handle movements of the character. Now, what is a blend tree? A blend tree is more or less like a state machine that is responsible for movements along a planar. So either on a left and right axis or a y axis. Also either on an x-axis or an x-planar and a y-planar. So selected with your locomotion selected, you can see this blend. When you double click your locomotion state, you can see this pop up. Now this is you can see with this blend here. Now selecting that, you see blend type is 1D. What we want to do is select that and say okay, I think the 1D will be suitable for this because we are not moving on the y-axis. So the blend types, we have 2D simple directional where you can have an x-axis and a y-axis, but in this one we are not moving. It's not a 2.5D kind of game. It's purely a 2D game where you move left and right and jump. And the same for 2D freeform and 2D freeform Cartesian. But we wouldn't get too much. Wouldn't get into those types. We would rather work on 1D. And in 1D, we would change this parameter from blend to horizontal, but we don't have a parameter known as horizontal. So we'll click this parameters tab and you can see there's blend here. We'll change the blend from blend to horizontal, and with that done, you can now select horizontal. Okay, so now horizontal here is basically a floating value. Now with parameters, you can always select a type of data type you want to cast to this blend tree, and we want to use a float in this instance. So now basically what this does, you'd see its benefits quite soon, both in scripts and a few minutes from now. So now I want to add a motion to this blend tree. So what we'll do is that we'll add motion field, and you can see that being selected. Now we want to add two motion fields. We want to add the idle, and as you can see, it has added some line from idle to idle, and you're going to add another motion field and add run. Okay, so you can see this cool graphics appearing. Okay, so idle basically want to set automate thresholds off because we want to specify our own thresholds. So what basically we mean is that when we are in idle, we want the horizontal value to be 0. And when we are running, like running forward, we want our max value to be 1. So from, as you can, if you can see this object from here, you realize when it's 0, she's static. When it's 1, she's running. 1, she's running. 0, she's now when we'll want to also add another motion field that takes care of when you're running backwards or when you're moving backwards. And okay, I think I would use that for another tutorial, so let's just stick with this for now, and we'll look at how we'll transition from here to here quite soon. Okay, so with this setup, when you go back to your base layer, now an animation tree is quite complex because we have layers that we transition from. I'll probably make a separate video tutorial directly explaining what an animator does, but just follow along for now. So right now we don't need this idle state and we don't need this run state, so we can delete that for now. So we delete this, then we also delete this, and then you can now see that now the locomotion is your default state, because when from entry you will just step straight into your blend tree. So with that setup, we can now create our we can now create our first script. So now you create a scripts folder in your assets, and then right click, create new C# script, and we call it movement. Now with that script created, you click on your optimized game object, and then you can either just drag and drop your optimized script onto this and double click it to open up in Visual Studio. Now with that opened, you can now create new values. We'll just create our data variables. So creating our variables, we'll have a float, move speed, and we'll have an a public float actually. I'm sorry. So that we'll be able to change its value in the inspector, and we also have a public animator, so that we'll be able to reference the animator on this particular game object. And now we're going to create a function that's going to be responsible for moving the game objects or the character. So we're going to have a float horizontal, just like the parameter we had in our animator called horizontal. And now this horizontal is going to take in input, and this input is going to be preset or predefined inputs in our game engine, which I showed in quite some previous videos or our previous playlist on inputs. So, but I'll show here too as well. So this input.get axis horizontal, this value needs to be spelled horizontal very well. This can be any name, but this particular one has to be spelled horizontal. And this is because in our game engine, when you go to edit and you go to project settings and you go to input manager, you see a number of axes and buttons predefined, and we have horizontal and vertical, spelled horizontal and vertical. Now these values take in key inputs like the arrow keys and the left and right button. Now these left and right buttons, or these key inputs, have a threshold value of between -1 and 1, just like our animator here, which has between here we define this as from 0 to 1, but when we are looking at going backwards, we would add the -1. So let's just do that. So now we will now have to define a vector2 variable, vector2, and we'll call it input, which is equal to a new vector2. I also explained vectors in a previous video on Unity for absolute beginners, so you can look into that. And basically vector2, just like other vectors, we have vector3 and vector4, taking two parameters, which are an x value and a y value. But since we only want the x value, we only place the x value and we leave the y value at 0. And that basically sets up your input. Now let's look at movement, shall we? So what we are going to do is that we are going to set our animator dot set float, and this float will take an ID, and this ID would be horizontal, and we'll pass in our value of input dot x. So basically what we have done here is that our animator, which we would get reference to in our game engine, will pass an ID, and now this ID is basically the parameter we set here, this horizontal. So we want to set this floating value here, and by passing its ID or its name horizontal and passing its value input.x. Now this input.x is this horizontal value here, which I also said takes in inputs from this value. This gets axis value, which is between -1 and 1. So when we move our button to when we press our right arrow key or our D key, we are basically passing a value of 1 to this horizontal floating variable, and that passes it to the animator. That moves the character, specifically speaking. But basically we need a speed for the character to move, and we would therefore multiply this character by move speed. Okay, so let's see whether we need to run past the function in our update, void update. So having done this, we can now move into our game engine and then drag and drop this animator into here, and maybe pass in a value of 2 in our move speed this variable. So in our game scene, right now when you press play and you realize that it still runs the idle animation, that's because if you go in our base layer, locomotion is now running, and then if I should press my D key, you realize that it's running, but it's not really. If you press your D key, it should run, but it's not actually moving because the move speed value is small. Now if you increase it a little bit, it's still not running, but the animation is playing quite well. So in our next video, we'll look at how to actually make this character move. Now we have the animation playing, but we don't have the character moving, and that's basically because of these parameters, which we'll get into in our next video. So until then, happy coding.